Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asian Global Institute, and HKU edX's Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. Our topic today is a book by Ajay Dahdal entitled Digital Currencies and Public Law, History, Constitutionalism, and the Revolutionary Nature of Money. The book advocates for deeper engagement by public lawyers in digital currency developments that threaten dramatic changes in the relationship between individuals and the government. Perhaps no modern issue is more widely acknowledged but less understood than that of digital currencies. The voice of constitutional scholars is crucially missing from existing digital money conversations. For example, private law scholars are grappling with the legal questions raised by digital currency models in property and contract law. Alternatively, public law scholars have yet to appreciate the significance of the moment. Indeed, the challenge of understanding the technical dimensions of digital money innovations has obscured the potential constitutional revolution that digital currencies represent. Andrew's book starts with the premise that money, quote, quote, is best thought of as a constitutional phenomenon. When seen in that light, it becomes clear that the changes in the nature of money represent changes in political and constitutional arrangements. Real paradigm shifts. Andrew explains how and why that's so by examining certain episodes in history where the nature of money was linked to renewed constitutional settlements, a resetting of the default rules for society. His book distills a core set of principles linking aspects of monetary innovation such as technical control of money supply to constitutional positions such as executive fiscal accountability. It's from such principles, therefore, that a conceptual framework is proposed that translates the specific attributes of digital currency proposals into the language of constitutional dynamics. As for the author, Ajay Dahdal holds a doctorate from the University of New South Wales, where he received an Outstanding Achievement Award in 2014 for his dissertation on the necessity of historical analysis and constitutional interpretation. He's currently an associate professor at the College of Law at Qatar University. Andrew has also taught constitutional and commercial law within Australia and Europe, both full-time and in an adjunct capacity. Writing on law, technology, and global legal frameworks, Andrew is now focused on exploring the intersections between private and public law, specifically by exploring the technocratic connections between constitutional and commercial legal frameworks. And with that, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. Quite an introduction.
Well, you are unique in that you're not coming at this from a tech law professor's background. You're not a financial law prof per se, like our good friend Doug Arner. You're a constitutional scholar, yet you've got something to say about digital currency. That I mean, we'll get to that in a moment, but that makes you very interesting, very very intriguing that you would pen such a book. I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what got you interested in digital currencies and the constitutional law.
I'm from Australia originally, and that's where I studied law. So it's a common law jurisdiction, obviously. And I've always had a passion for constitutional law. And my PhD focused on looking at constitutional interpretation using history. But the case study I looked at was the banking power, or how the Australian federal government can regulate banks in Australia. And as I got to the end of my PhD, I really got interested in banking and finance through that particular case study. And as probably anyone who's done a PhD will tell you, by the time you get to the end of the PhD, you're kind of over the topic and you don't really want to. It's like breaking up with a partner. You have to see other people before you can be friends again. So
that's quite a way to put it. Yeah.
So I really got interested in banking and finance and technology, which, you know, I'm a geek at heart as well. I love computers and things. So it was a perfect intersection of subjects, the technology, the finance, the law, but I've always left the constitutional aspect out of it. And it's always been looming large in the background of my thinking, and I've always kind of suppressed it, saying, okay, I don't want to go down that path again, because it really gets very, I would say, political. I sometimes say that constitutional law is politics dressed up in drag. So eventually I said, I want to get back to this subject matter. And this book was the opportunity for me to reconnect all those aspects that I've been looking at over the years with constitutional law.
You know, it's often said when students first study constitutional law, they tell them that, you know, inherently a lot of it is very political, and a lot of it's very historical in nature as well. But I mean, but for you to write this book, I mean, what compelled you to write this book again is both as a constitutional scholar, and also the fact that the market for such works on digital currencies is already very crowded.
I think a lot, with the greatest respect to everyone who's written on the subject, they've all had, you know, interesting things to say from their particular perspectives. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every time I would discuss digital currencies with people, and I would say, or they would say, that digital currencies are going to change everything. It wasn't clear what the baseline was that was being changed, and it was not clear what that change would be in terms of the relationship between people and authority, i.e. government. Okay, so I wanted to know, okay, where are we now in terms of money? What is money? And then what might the possible changes in the future be? And so I dug down into what is money, and that took me down a very interesting historical rabbit hole. And it's through the analysis of various historical episodes across multiple civilizations and jurisdictions around the world, it's become abundantly clear to me that every time there's a change in the nature of rule, the monetary change has also figured in that process. Now, in some situations, the change in money precipitates the change in the constitutional arrangements. In other situations, the change in the constitutional arrangement is consolidated post facto by changing the money. And you see this 2,000 years ago in China, where they had robust discussions on whether money should be freely minted by anyone, or whether the money supply should be controlled by the emperor, the central authority. And that theme really cuts across history. You see that replicated in medieval Europe. You see it replicated in colonial America. You see it replicated in Republic and the early years of the American Republic. And so I thought to myself, there is something here. There are some important lessons that we can learn from history to tell us, or to guide us. And when I say us, I'm talking about scholars, I'm talking about policymakers, I'm talking about the general public. If money changes in a particular way, what are the downstream consequences of that change? Okay, and so I tried by the end of the book to distill a framework, a conceptual framework that guides different forms of money. And when we're talking about like digital currencies, we have the unbacked digital tokens like Bitcoin, we have the stable coins, we have the central bank digital currencies. All of them have their unique attributes, and all of them have different configurations of responsibilities, obligations, technical capabilities, but they also represent a constellation of constitutional positions as well, in terms of how independent a person is to engage in private transactions, in terms of how accountable the issuer of money is. So I've tried to bring them together in a coherent way so that the conversations that we have are on the same page, we're using the same language. And if we do want to talk about the paradigmatic shift that might take place with digital currencies, that conversation's transparent and there aren't any hidden assumptions which are either unacknowledged, or if you're a bit cynical, you would say that there are, changes, constitutional changes that are hidden beneath digital currency proposals that are being deliberately implemented. Now, I'm not that cynical, but my position is that people just don't know what the consequences are, and I'm trying to, shed a light on what are the possible ramifications of, having a central bank digital currency configured in a particular way.
Following on from that, then, what do you feel your book adds to the ongoing discussion that other texts don't? What would you say is new and innovative and first impression that your book adds to the ongoing discussion? What is your contribution to the field as a scholar and writer?
Look, there's been a lot written on monetary history, and that's super interesting. And there's also been a lot written on digital currencies. But I think my unique contribution is linking the two. I've tried to continue the trajectory. So there's been a long trajectory of monetary history, and then it's like digital currency is like a brand new innovation, but it's not. The technical aspects are brand new, but the efforts to control money or to change money, these are not brand new. So I think I'm bringing a historical lens to digital currencies, and I mean, a lot of people think of digital currencies as that's modern day money, or even fiat currencies are modern day money, but it's not. If you think of like modernity, the idea of that arose from Enlightenment thinkers, you think of capitalism, you think of liberalism, you think of rationality, these ideas. The modern monetary standard was metallism, so paper money backed by gold or silver coins. And that was the standard of money from, let's say, 600 BC to 1930, nearly 2,000 years. Fiat money is, I would call it postmodern money. It's money stripped of intrinsic value. And I mean, the postmodernist movement was the intellectual idea of challenging all absolute values and looking at the hidden power structures within those frameworks. And I think fiat money is money that is inherently an extension of state power. So it's very, shallowly hidden, the power behind it. And it doesn't have any intrinsic value. So it's postmodern money. So digital currencies is like techno-postmodernism, really. But we do see some efforts to return to a monetary standard where there are limitations. It's not an absolute extension of any central power authority. And we see that, for example, with Bitcoin, which is sometimes described as a political movement in search of an ideology. And I'm hoping that through this book and through the historical lens, that people will start looking at different digital currency models with the intellectual tools that we already have in terms of what politics is driving this, what idea of the good is driving this particular notion of digital currencies. And I'm looking forward to the book being released. It will be released hopefully in September or October this year. I'm a bit nervous about how it will be received, because, like you said, it is quite novel. It's looking at something super new and technical from a perspective of history and intellectual history. But I honestly believe, when I finished writing this book, I've come to the conclusion that there is no way you can have a robust conversation about money and monetary change and digital currencies without looking at the history. I mean, there are just so many examples of modern digital money debates having taken place hundreds of years ago, in very much the same language and same terms that we're talking about now. I'll give you just one brief example. Stable coins and looking at tokens that are tethered to some real world standard. Now, really, that's just the modern way of talking about paper money being linked to gold coins. And people, 150, 200 years ago were always concerned about the assets that back the paper money that was circulating. And are those assets stable? Are those assets actually there? How do we look at regulating the reserves that banks have? Should there be competing currencies? Like, the idea of competing currencies, we discuss it now as if it's something very novel. But in Australian history, for example, in the late 19th century, there was a plethora of competing private currencies, different paper currencies. Same as in the US, all issued by private banks, all very beautiful and ornately illustrated, I might add. But there are modern debates that have their echo in history. And I think protagonists in modern day digital currency debates would be very well served looking at the historical record and how those issues played out, for better or for worse.
You know what? I mean, speaking for myself, I mean, what was refreshing about your book is that you're pretty upfront that in saying that cryptocurrencies have political implications, and that the advent of the age of crypto or virtual assets heralds an opportunity for constitutional reform. Am I getting that right, or am I overstating the case?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I call it the mirror of money. Money is a mirror of society, and money is a mirror of beliefs, and it's from the individual level all the way up to geopolitics and the way in which states relate to each other. I try and explore all levels with which money is a reflection of belief systems and power politics at the geopolitical level with for example the weaponization of the US dollar, and so I've tried to look at it holistically, what money means to an individual. Like, there is a real deep philosophical sense here which I try to engage with, where money is something very, very personal. It's taboo. Like, in a lot of settings, it's more acceptable to talk about things relating to personal intimacy than it is to talk about personal finances.
Absolutely, and you'll see this with our generation, that people are more inclined to talk about what they do in their bedrooms with their significant other, rather than talk about salary. Yeah, well, but even with that too, there is a rising movement amongst the younger generations for salary transparency.
Look, what does it say about our society, AJ, when the virtue of an emerging currency is its trustlessness, that you don't need trust? it means that we've lost trust. And so, the idea of trusting that the paper money you hold in your hand is actually intrinsically valued and connected to something solid in the real world, that's now been deeply ingrained in us through fiat currencies. And so there's no trust in money. And the close relationship that people have with governments, and people have or are losing trust in governments for various reasons. So this is all reflected in money, and money being a reflection of the emerging sentiments is, again, nothing that's new. If you look at Chinese history, when there was suspicion, or there was a lack of belief that the central emperor had control over the realms, the monetary standard would deteriorate.
Right, but it was deemed that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven.
Yes, absolutely. And the money itself reflected this, like the Wuzhu coin, which had the square hole in the middle, was actually a reflection of the emperor's dominion over heaven and earth. And so money as a reflection of belief systems, money as a part of religious belief systems. I also look at money in Islam, and how the purity of money was linked to the trustworthiness of the transacting parties. And so trust was very closely intertwined with money in the Islamic tradition. And in fact, for hundreds of years, all through Europe, and people wanted Arab and Islamic coins because they knew that the gold in them was not diluted and they were trustworthy standards of coinage. I mean, you find Islamic coins as far north as England in the numismatic records. So the reflection of people's belief systems, religious systems, political beliefs, it's all channeled through money. Money is the medium through which people discuss and battle alternative ideologies. And if you look at 19th century US politics, money dominated. Like, apart from the Civil War in the middle of the 19th century, the monetary issue dominated American politics.
Well, if you think about the elections of 1896, 1900, the debate. I mean, mankind is being crucified on a cross of gold and silver. Was the
I think one of my chapters might even be called that. I think, because I look at the election of 1896 in great detail, and people were divided on the nature of money. There was a political divide between those who wanted a silver standard and those who wanted a gold standard, and each group had their ideologies that funneled through these particular monetary belief systems. And I think as we get to this point where fiat currency...
Notice you talk. I don't mean to interrupt, but
that
all they were debating was really different flavors of mercantilism. Please go ahead.
No, you're right. It was, but for them it represented so much more. It was not so trivial for them. For them, it was. I mean, if you you read the speech, which I've extracted parts of in the book of William Jennings Bryan.
For one side, for William Jennings Bryan, it was that they equated it with Christian virtue.
Those who advocated the gold standard. William Jennings Bryan was more on the side of silver, and his advocacy was for a broader base of money. And really, it comes down to an economic conflict between the creditor class and the debtor class. And there's a dispute about whether you want quantity of money or quality of money. If you have quantity of money, it's great for debtors because the value of their debts decrease. If you have quality of money, then the value of debts remains. People are going to be repaid in the same currency. You don't want to give someone a loan in gold and have them pay it back in worthless paper money. And in fact, there were plenty of, and I look at these Supreme Court cases in the 19th century in the US, where the greenback, which was introduced by Lincoln during the Civil War, was being used to pay back loans that were originally issued in gold. And the creditors were understandably very upset. I don't want this worthless piece of green paper in place of gold. But, eventually it was determined that this was acceptable form of repaying a debt. And so, and again, this is a theme that we see in colonial history in parts of Africa. People talk about money being weaponized, in the modern era with the US hegemony and the US dollar dominating all trade and things. But in the 19th century, it was the pound sterling. And the British knew very well how to use their money to subjugate and control parts of Africa and India in particular. And so the weaponization of dominant currencies is nothing new. So this is a constitutional issue as well. It's a how much foreign power and foreign intervention can countries leverage their currency to accomplish. And so the constitutional issues are broad and deep. And I've in the last few months or years even, I've become increasingly frustrated with limited legal analysis of the digital currency issue, looking at how it will operate within existing parameters of contract law and property law and things like that, which are very important. They are important, but I just think you're missing the forest for the trees.
With regards to what you said about about the pound sterling, I think the notion of currency is also tied to one's sense of one's country and its place in the world. And consequently, depending on whether or not I have the currency of a strong country in my pocket, also my place in the world as an individual.
Yeah.
I think
you're right.
Suez, the British Empire ended really where it was really once India left. That was the beginning of the end, because the others would want their own independence as well. The other major colonies would want their independence.
I think Suez, the first word you said.
But exactly,
56,
Suez.
56 was the point.
Yeah, that they realized that when Eisenhower threatened to start selling francs and pounds on the open market, that would send their still recovering economies, that would send their economies.
That's the global leverage you have when you control currencies to such a degree. And we have at the moment a unipolar world, maybe an emerging multipolar world. And that transition from unipolar to multipolar, it will also, I think, be accompanied by or precipitated by currency changes globally. And we might see this through BRICS. We might see this through other regional arrangements. But I just want to go back to something you said before, that people's national identity is linked to their currency. So, that's a very...
You see American pride has ebbed and flowed based on the strength of the dollar. That years ago, if we think about the years immediately after the war, and it was the American tourist that would go abroad and make plenty of bang for their buck.
Yeah.
And go about, throwing their weight around, throwing their cash around, and coming back home with gifts and all the wares they'd purchased for, much more cheaply compared to back home, and bragging, coming back with all their stories.
Yeah.
And the dollar, that was on the back of the dollar. The dollar gave them that luxury. You fast forward now, yes, the dollar does give them that luxury, but the point is, it isn't just the dollar. Okay, the dollar may not go as far as it used to, but the bigger issue is now there are people outside of the U.S. with more dollars than you. And that rude awakening, I don't think, is sunk in to a lot of Americans. That there are 300 million people in China.
There's more than that.
There's a middle class that's bigger than the entire U.S. population.
Oh, okay, middle class, yes. Okay.
Yeah, there's a middle class in China that's bigger than the entire U.S. population. That has not sunk in.
Absolutely. And you talk about American pride in the dollar. Well, the dollar's inflated, and so is American pride. I think there's inflated pride now, and I think the dollar empire is now realizing its limits, and like all empires previously, it may have overextended, but we'll see. But I just wanted to get back to an issue you mentioned, or something you mentioned previously, talking about the connection between nationality or national connection or political connections and money. So we live in a globalized world now, and this gives us the impression that we can travel and we can go and interchange and interact and trade with people, transact with people all over the world. But during the period of the gold standard, and when there was metallism, and I think this imagery is very, very apt. You could melt down a coin and reforge it as another currency in another jurisdiction. Money as gold was malleable. Fiat currencies are not malleable. So I would say, ironically, previously when we had this, and this was the bane of governments, that monetary flows could not be stopped. Gold could be melted down into jewelry and taken to another country and reforged into money, and this would play havoc with national economies. And so, but the imagery is important because you could melt down and reforge, and this was also the idea of loyalty. Your loyalty to one political community or another through your money could be melted and reforged in another and remade in another political community. And during the 17th and 18th century in Europe, you look at how many times the borders changed and how many times loyalties and allegiances changed. This was a constant issue. Now, in the era of globalism, money is less transferable. It's I'm talking about like even international money transfers using digital technologies. They have to go through various steps and checks, and it's much more controlled, the transferability of money right now than it was 150 years ago. In this era of so-called globalism, it's harder to shift wealth globally.
So many things come to mind when I hear you speak. That there's the the famous quote by Lord Rothschild, "I care not who makes a nation's laws. Show me who prints the money, and I'll show you where the real power is." I mean, I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
There's the whole old adage of, does economics control politics and politics control economics? Is it some synergistic combination, symbiotic connection between the two? Is it maybe not a yin yang thing, but I mean, to your point about fiat currency, I mean, even from my studies years ago of the history of economic thought, it was clear that every fiat currency in history has failed. I mean, so it was interesting to hear your thoughts of fiat currency being money stripped of intrinsic value. And then to your point about digital money being tech with no sense of postmodernism, and that Bitcoin is political movement in search of ideology. Certainly when Bitcoin came out, you had that lunatic anarcho-libertarian fringe that were the biggest proponents. They're still in the background, but it seems like Bitcoin seems to have gone more mainstream now that you've got backers, you've got mainstream respectable people in banking and finance, that are advocating dealing with Bitcoin. So can it truly be said then that Bitcoin is still a political movement in search of an ideology?
Well, yeah, I think the early adopters of Bitcoin they're laughing all the way to the bank at the moment. But there are also canaries in the coal mine who have a very early sense of the way in which the fiat system is heading, and I think it's a case of the mainstream trying to look. I think the mainstream adoption is probably just opportunistic. The managed money will go where returns are likely to follow. The question you need to ask is, why are returns arising in Bitcoin? Why is there interest in it? Why are people adopting it? And I think the mainstream adoption is financial and opportunistic. It's not really ideological or anything like that. And I don't think it can ever be, because nation states and governments are unable to control. They're trying to, as much as possible, to put in rails and rules and regulations to control the trading in this currency. But when you have whole countries like I think it was Ecuador adopting Bitcoin as a currency of the whole state, then it's not a case of the mainstream trying to dominate Bitcoin. To me, it looks like Bitcoin is winning over political communities and winning over whole countries. And so there's something in it. And hopefully through my book, I've uncovered what's some of that latent, like people have a sense there's something wrong with the money. They try not to think about it. As long as their bank account is over zero, they won't really think about it. But people are thinking about money more and more. And whether it's the cost of living, whether it's the interest rate, people are waking up, I think, to the relevance of money. Now, those in control of money at the level of the central banks, the ideology that's always pushed is that central bank and interest rates policy is something that's scientific, it's something that's objective, it's something that's not political, and in fact, appointees to central banks must be insulated from politics. But it's becoming more and more obvious that decisions over money creation and monetary policy are political positions. That's I follow the situation in Australia. The new Reserve Bank governor in Australia has implemented a policy of post meeting press conferences. So board members of the Reserve Bank, after they make a monetary policy decision to hold interest rates or to raise them, they have to answer questions from journalists who hopefully will be conveying the concerns of the public. And so, people look at the Federal Reserve, probably more the decisions of the Federal Reserve more so than the decisions of the White House in terms of what's going to happen in the US and the US economy. So I think people are waking up to and I think one of the points I make in the book is that policymakers need to get ahead of this, because there are political frustrations that people have. They channeled either into the culture war, and they're channeled away from financial issues. But history has shown that inevitably these political energies and these political differences, and in the US, things are polarized more so than any time I can remember in my lifetime or in the history of the US apart from the Civil War. Very, very polarized. Once money becomes a political issue, and all it would take is for someone like Donald Trump to say, hey, look what they've done to our money. Okay? And people are gonna just switch on, and all of those energies will find an outlet, and that's when the economic turmoil might begin, and that's when the fiat system might unravel. All it will take is for one populist politician to know just how powerful the wave is that they can ride into power if they only use the issue of money. Because like I said before, and like we discussed, it's something that strikes home. It's very intimate, it's very personal. When you talk about money, you're talking about people's families, you're talking about people's livelihoods. It's a very powerful issue, but it's been since Roosevelt and the Great Depression and the introduction of the fiat currency system, it's been depoliticized. It's been defanged. But once opportunistic politicians realize it, and so that's why part of the inspiration for writing the book was, let's get ahead of this topic. Let's understand it. So we can at least channel the discussion in productive and constructive ways and not be blindsided by this pent-up political rage that might find an outlet in monetary debates. And digital currencies is a monetary debate like no other. And so I'm trying to, put a saddle on the horse, so to speak.
I rather concur. The topic of money is deep. It's a deeply emotive issue. I think we shouldn't downplay the strong connection, attachment people have to their currencies. I mean, their connection to the pound.
Brexit. Look at Brexit.
Queen Elizabeth was Queen. Yeah, that's a big,
they never joined
big reason why
they never joined the euro, did they?
They joined the EU. Yeah, they didn't join the Euro Union, but they joined the. They didn't sign on to the currency pact, but they signed on to the, to the EU and the Four Freedoms. But yeah, I mean, of course, I think Queen Elizabeth being alive at that time had a lot to do with it. But I want to come back to something you point out in your book, which is that in your book you say that by exploring certain episodes in history, you're able to distill a core set of principles linking aspects of monetary innovation, such as technical control of the money supply, to constitutional positions such as executive fiscal accountability. Could you elaborate on that? What are these core principles that we might be able to cite to guide us and help us along in this current debate over crypto?
No, one of the core principles is accountability, and accountability of the money issuer. So how accountable are they for the monetary issuing decisions, whether it's over issuing, under issuing, or issuing substandard currencies, or accountability. That's one of the core characteristics. The other one is technical control. Technical control, whether an issuer has no technical control over the creation of money. So think, for example, gold. You can dig it up. Anyone can dig it up, and if they have the know-how, they can refine it. Or extreme technical control, absolute technical control. That is being able to demonetize someone's money that they hold, like say in their account. And you can think of like a authoritarian system of CBDCs where there's no checks and balances. And then there's the other kind of aspect I look at is the public or private nature of the money issuer. So there are three kind of axes that I draw out, and literally I draw them out in a kind of Cartesian graph, conceptual space: accountability, public-private nature of the issuer, and controllability. And within these kind of matrix, you can triangulate the characteristics of money. Is it publicly issued or privately issued? Is the issuer accountable or unaccountable? Can they control or can't they control the money? And then when through this kind of framework, I argue that you can design a currency from first principles. So you have the principles in mind first, and you technically work towards it. At the moment, we're like, okay, we can technically do this, and then we're having to chase the technology to understand, okay, what does that mean in conceptual and political terms? So like, let's say you want a privately issued currency where the issuer has very little control over the money once it's issued. and they are completely accountable. And you might say that is maybe a libertarian monetary design, but you could do the same for a social democratic monetary design, or a communistic money design, or a Republican money design. So first principles come first in monetary design. And so I'm hoping that things haven't moved too quickly ahead of us already, and before some serious implementations of some new monetary designs that have taken place, we will have the opportunity to have the discussion about, okay, what characteristics do we want here? What is the ideal money this is theological rather than technological. So we're looking at what the end goal will be philosophically, rather than looking at what we can do in material form and then try and figure out whether it's good or bad afterwards. I think the question of ought to come first. So we ought to think first, what ought we do, before we look at what can we do in terms of actual technology and feasibility.
It's illuminating to hear you talk about currency from first principles, and that looking at things theologically, looking at things holistically. It's funny, but I sometimes have to remind people that the mandate that Mayor Bloomberg, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, when he started the Bloomberg News Network years ago, was that he told its first editor-in-chief, "I want you to tell the story of money in all its forms." and if you do that, you'll pretty much describe the human condition.
Absolutely.
And I think he was right. I mean, he had an appreciation of the history of money. I mean, and I enjoyed that you mentioned that when it came to the world of Islam, because from having written a little bit about Islamic finance, I mean, my sense is that even today, the only sound money to them is really gold, and to a lesser extent silver. But to your point about how in one age the purity of money was linked to the trustworthiness of the parties, and then you think about how their views on money also equated into things like credit, things like philanthropy. Under Islam, any type of usury was forbidden. Making money off of money was forbidden. But in the Judeo-Christian world, I think it was any excessive interest was forbidden. But even in medieval Europe, that was what the max you were allowed to charge was 1/7. But Christians couldn't do that. And so it fell to that most oppressed and put upon of minorities, the Jews. They were allowed to do that type of business. So, it's interesting when we consider that. And to your point about the perennial conflict between the creditor and the debtor class, I mean, on its surface, it almost seems Marxian, but to be fair to Marx, and I'm by no means a man of the left, but to be fair to Marx, in his depiction of the nature of human history of being one of the haves versus the have-nots, I think he got that part right.
I agree.
I think he got that. And again, even in economics, people sometimes over-exaggerate the differences in the views of value between, the neoclassical school, classical economics, and the Marxians. That whereas with the classical school, I think it was 97% of the value of a good came from labor. The rest was time and risk. And the sort versus With the Marxists, it was 100%.
Yeah.
But again, people forget that they were not that far off. But I guess a lot of it comes down to implementation and what policies you choose to impose. The other thing is, that if you look at the history of debtor-creditor relations in the U.S., I mean, I'm sure you've found this in your own research, that the further west you tend to go, the better rights are for debtors than they are for creditors. Because the first settlements in the U.S. were in the Northeast. Those that went bankrupt there ended up in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Those that got into there ended up, in California. And, if they couldn't hack it there, they wound up in Texas and then into Florida. And that's really apparently the only reason Florida has the Anglos. Because of that. So in a real sense, the history of the U.S. could be seen from a standpoint of bankruptcy law, that in terms of migratory patterns compelled by bankruptcy and indebtedness, and money is at the core of indebtedness.
Yeah, and you look at the politics of people in different parts of the world, or different parts of the U.S., and the like you said, the laws that favor either the creditor class or the debtor class, or historically, that demographic distribution is reflected in the politics. The legal distribution of laws in those areas correlate with the demographics of the population. And again, you go back to the election of 1896. A lot of the people supporting the cause of silver with William Jennings Bryan were Democrats. Of course, back then Democrats means something a lot different than what it means now. But they were drawn,
certainly, because you had the pro free trade Bourbon Democrats.
Yes, and they wanted more money, more. The farmers who had, after slavery, a lot of the farmers had to borrow money to get new machinery to fill the gap of the free labor that they used to enjoy. And so a lot of the farmers took on debt, and they wanted more money in circulation, gold and silver, because that would reduce the value of their debts, and it would make it easier for them to sell their products. And so the politics was reflected in the money, and the creditor class wanted staunchly to maintain a gold standard, and as long as they could lend to the government, and they were all on the East Coast, they were happy for things to remain as they were. And of course, the gold case won the election of 1896, and America went on the gold standard, and that was a clear triumph for the creditor class. And we have then the Gilded Age of unrestrained capitalism. But then, that consequently led to political change as well, with a more interventionist state, whether it's the creation of the FDA or was the Interstate Railway Commission, I think it was. So there was a lot of government authorities established in the late 19th, early 20th century in the US to address the unrestrained capitalism and the excessive lending that those who controlled the gold were able to engage in.
But that period of untrammeled Republican dominance, and yes, in certain instances, corruption, from 1896 to 1932, that period of Republican dominance, it was probably the closest America got to, a dog-eat-dog, Wild West, libertarian, capitalist economy. And then people were like, no, we're we're in the 20th century now.
Yeah.
There need to be some brakes on the system for it to be for it to have any semblance to be called civilized.
Yeah.
It was a period of great deal of inequality, great deal of corruption, great deal of cronyism, great deal of injustice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you were fortunate enough to have emigrated or established yourself then, or been the children of those that did so, you were well poised, and you would have done very well for yourself.
Some, a lot of Irish and Italian immigrants probably disagree, but some did very well.
But to have planted your roots in that time, because keep in mind, they slammed the doors on immigration around about when you factor in the tens of millions that in any given year they would have let in terms of immigration.
Yeah.
In the early 20th century, the 30-40 year lock on immigration, apart from Northwestern Europeans that they placed in, that
Yeah.
again, that was an age of so much money to be made. But I mean, in the show, the HBO show, The Gilded Age, which takes place before, that covers part of it.
Yeah.
But
it's a bit sanitized, that show. Actually, I don't think they looked at the gritty side of things.
The book it's based on gets into a great deal of the nastiness.
Yeah.
But again, it was an age. I mean, for example, that explosion in the black middle class, upper middle class.
Yeah.
We never saw those numbers for that community after that.
Yeah,
that was a temporary aberration.
But there was also it wasn't just the kind of the system which was working and helped and lifted people out of poverty. There were great geopolitical upheavals at the time because Europe was plunged into World War One. American manufacturing plugged the gap. It was able to export to Europe, and not just to Europe, to export markets that the Europeans previously serviced before they got into the war. So that meant there was a lot of gold inflow from Europe and from the rest of the world into US banks in the late 19-teens and early 1920s. And that meant that there was a lot of money to lend, and a lot of capital investment could take place. And of course, in a very short time, it caused a massive bubble, which burst in 1929.
But notice, some of the biggest fortunes to be made were made within days and weeks of the crash of 29, when people picked up assets, those that kept their powder dry, those that still had capital, could pick up assets on the stock market or even real property for cheap. And I mean, it was a time when those with capital can negotiate favorable terms, and we have countless examples of farmers who committed suicide because they basically had to give away their properties. And again, people underestimate the 30s was probably the closest the U.S. ever came to becoming a socialist republic.
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize that Roosevelt outlawed gold. You couldn't hold anything other than ornamental jewelry as gold. There was
and all the people that were gullible enough to turn in their gold.
Executive order to hand in what for 2,000 years had been considered money. The government ordered, and I mean that's quite shocking. That shocked the American population. But and the international equivalent of that is in Nixon closing the gold window and telling international central banks, sorry, your US dollars can no longer be redeemed for gold. That had the same effect globally that Roosevelt's executive order had domestically. And digital currencies are an innovation on an innovation. Fiat currency in its purest form has only been around since 1971. So digital currencies are it's an experiment upon an experiment. So going into this, you know, with the idea that, you know, this is going to turn out well, we just got to keep pushing the limits of technology, I think is very foolish and very dangerous. And again, I've written this book as a guide, a handbook, a warning, that when we're talking about monetary design, we're talking a lot more than something of value. We're talking about people's values.
Your point about the gold standard bears further reflection, because, you know, it seemed to me around about 2006, the current system wasn't feasible. That when the world's biggest debtor nation is also the issue of the world's currency, if the debt is denominated in a currency that only it can print, well, then surely it has an incentive to print more, and that way you're going to see U.S. asset values inflated. It can just inflate away the value of its debt.
Yeah, it's so obvious. It's scary.
It'll pay it back in a depreciated currency, and the rest of the world just has to. The rest of the world just has to live it, so long as the rest of the world is willing to accept dollars.
And who holds most of the debt, or who holds a lot of that U.S. debt?
Presumably, it's the U.S. It's the U.S. citizen.
That accounts for some of it, but China also holds significant amounts of U.S. debts.
But do we know exactly, given that they no longer print M3 figures, right?
No, we don't. We don't know exactly. We don't know. And the U.S. is now, you know, explicitly saying we're going through a decoupling. We want to decouple. And you know, that doesn't augur well for the region. You want cooperation, not confrontation. But I mean, that amount of debt, I think we're up into the 30s of trillions of dollars now, $30 trillion. And the only thing that can stop the money machine is domestic politics. And that's when we see, you know, the debt ceiling, the U.S. Congress not passing a budget, and civil servants not getting paid. That's the only thing that can stop the money machine. And so that's why I genuinely fear for internal American stability arising from the monetary issue. It's a powder keg.
Treasury yeah. When it came back to the gold standard, Treasury Secretary John Connolly's in 1971, his remark to his European counterparts, and he's a historical figure, that he was sitting next to JFK when he got shot, because he was governor of Texas and a Democrat, but he switched his affiliation, and Nixon made him his Treasury Secretary. But Connolly said to his European counterparts, after Nixon closed the gold window of convertibility, that the dollar is our currency, but it's your problem. And that, you know, our lives will continue, but you have to deal with the fallout of no longer being able to easily convert dollars into gold, and vice versa.
Yeah.
That remember Clyde Prestowitz, who was a aide to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce in the Reagan administration, and I think at Dartmouth in the 60s, he remembers a time, and as a young man, Saturday night news broadcasts, they would announce how much gold had left the U.S. to be sent to France, to Germany, you know, whichever country. And, you know, the Americans quite rightly made the decision, no, we can't afford to uphold this standard anymore. But okay, but if what I guess what I'm wondering is, what is the change in terms of constitutional reform that cryptocurrencies herald? What is the opportunity for constitutional reform that cryptocurrencies give us? And what will, and once those reforms presume take place, what will the system look like
Well,
moving
the
forward?
thing is, the fiat monetary system is so divorced of traditional constitutions, the US, the Australian, the Swiss constitution. For example, the Australian constitution says very clearly, nothing but gold and silver shall be money for used as money for the payment of debts, something along those lines. And then in another section, it talks about paper currencies separately, but it envisions that the constitutional arrangement will be for the existence of a metallism, a metal-based currency with paper money on top of it for circulation. So the current system and the digital currency extension of that system. So I know you asked me about digital currencies, and I've started talking about fiat currencies. It's because the digital currencies that are being proposed, a lot of them, other than the ones that are limited in some technical way, like Bitcoin, they're just an extension, a transition in the form of money from a physical to digital. They're not really radical transformation. So constitutional change is difficult. Most constitutions have a very extensive or hard to achieve thresholds in order to change the constitution. But the question is not about changing the constitution. The question is about rediscovering the meaning of the constitution and the monetary framework within which it was constitutions, the Australian, the American, that they were adopted in. And you will see that the amount of power that such control over the money supply and the technical control over money it invades people's privacy, which is, even though Roe v. Wade has been overturned, Roe v. Wade, the whole constitutional basis for it was, women have a right to their bodies because it's a privacy issue with their doctors and whatnot. So privacy is a huge constitutional issue, particularly in the US, and digital currencies touch upon that. The protection of property, in the 14th Amendment in the US, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Okay. Digital currencies, I'm not that familiar with the case law around whether cash is considered. I think it might be cash with specific serial numbers is property, but cash in general is not. But there's a question about, are you being deprived of your liberty or your property, or even your life? I mean, a lot of people if you can't buy groceries because your bank account is, is that tending towards a deprivation of life? Obviously in the US, it's talks more about, execution and the capital punishment and whatnot. But I mean, these are constitutional angles, whether it's privacy or upholding life, liberty, and property, or the accountability of the executive branch. The idea of the separation of powers, like can the level of power that the executive branch, let's say through a central monetary authority, has over money and changing the regulations around money, is that a form of legislation that is affecting people's fundamental rights? And shouldn't that be the purview of the legislature rather than the executive? So do digital currencies shift the balance of power between different branches of the government? So there are very important, very fundamental constitutional questions that need to be examined. I mean, I haven't got down the line that much into looking at things from that perspective. This book is maybe just a first step of starting the conversation and inviting other constitutional scholars to this field, because I know some public law scholars who have done very good work in this. I'll just say Will Bateman in Australia has done very good work at this, and I know Jason Allen, who's in Singapore at the moment, is very interested in this area. All Australians, I might add, must be something in the water. But there is a clear intersection between public law and money, and I don't think it's explored deeply enough, and I think it's really, really important. And it shouldn't just be the purview of commercial lawyers, corporate lawyers, to look at digital money developments, um, and look at technical regulations, financial market regulations. Yes, they're important. Yes, there's a lot to be said about that, but I think there is a deeper argument within which those limited arguments exist, and that deeper, broader argument is the constitutional perspective on digital currencies.
Just to shift gears, I know you're not an economist, but I think you've studied the subject matter for long enough that you're probably aware of this concept of Gresham's law, that bad money drives good money, often thought of as people, if you give given a choice, people will retain their gold and silver and spend their paper money. Does Gresham's law have, is it still a valid concept in the modern age?
I look at Gresham's law closely in the book, actually, and in the modern age, I think it might apply. So the Gresham's law, stated simply, is bad money drives out good. So to give a simple example, if you've got two silver coins and one contains 100% silver and one has been diluted and only contains 70% silver, and the tax man comes, which coin are you going to give the tax man? You're going to give him the one with less silver because you want to keep more for yourself. So the good coins are hoarded. People don't want to spend them because they don't want to spend them at face value when their intrinsic value is worth more. In the digital currency space, I couldn't really. I did look at it and I examined it, and I couldn't see really how Gresham's law applied in digital currencies. I suppose when you have the choice between currencies, let's say you've got Bitcoin and you've got fiat currency, and you can pay your tax in Bitcoin, then that kind of mindset might set in and say, okay, well, you know what, I think, it's like those people that bought pizzas for 5 Bitcoins in 2010. They ended up paying, $500,000 for a pizza. So in that situation, yes.
I know them. They reside in Dubai, and they've been kicking themselves ever since.
Yeah. So I suppose when there's a multiplicity of money, and part of that multiplicity includes digital currencies, and there are there's like 10,000 different cryptocurrencies. Some shams, some have some utility, some not, some are memes. So when you hold a multiplicity of coins and you can choose to spend your coins or your tokens, and you've got a choice, you will spend the ones that you think are worth less or will be worth less in the future, and if they're being treated as the same, then Gresham's law will apply in that situation. But I looked at it a little bit on a geopolitical level with the US dollar again. When people have the choice to trade with different currencies, and they look at the US dollar and they're thinking, okay, well, they just keep printing it, and it's just the value is going to keep depreciating, and I don't really want to hold. It's like hot potato. I don't want to hold on to this dollar too long because the value of it, the purchasing power, is going to go down. So they will choose not to use the US dollar or hold the US dollar. And I suppose in that situation, there might be a demand for other currencies, and if there's a cross-border CBDC that allows trade to take place, let's say along the Belt and Road project, and it's a Chinese CBDC, for example, people might think, okay, well, the value of this particular medium is more stable than the US dollar. And so on a geopolitical level, you might see Gresham's law apply.
And ultimately, Andrew, what is the policy outcome that you're advocating for?
Transparency, one word, transparency. If monetary authority or a government is proposing a monetary reform, I want the conversation to be transparent about what this means for people's relationships with the state. Okay, and this is the fundamental priority here. I want a transparent debate. That's I think a value in itself. But like I said before, I don't think the lack of transparency is due to any deviousness or an idea that this is some plan for a global world government or something like that. I think there is just fundamentally a lack of understanding about what money is, what money means, what money can do, and the interconnected web of relations between individuals, communities, nations, and international relations. It's all one interconnected web, from the individual all the way up to global power players. They're all connected through this web of money. And if you start tinkering with one part of the web, the whole thing can come apart in very chaotic and unpredictable ways. And this is not me hypothesizing. This is me looking at 2,500 years of history and seeing this happen over and over again. I mean, history. There are two types of histories. There's the history where you can learn from it. It's like Herodotus history. It's not an actual record of exactly everything that happened. It's like a narrative history. And then there's the technical history that professional historians do to actually find out what happened and dates and people and things like that. So my analysis in this book is a little bit of both. So I am looking at like important episodes like the Yuan dynasty in China introducing the first fiat currency 1,000 years ago. I look at that and I examine what the implications were, why it happened, and how it ended. But also, across the sweep of history, there are themes that arise again and again. There are dynamics between people and power centers, be it the Catholic Church or the Roman Empire or a Chinese dynasty or colonial authorities. There are themes, dynamics that arise again and again. And I think everyone would be well served who's engaging in this debate in acknowledging the existence of these dynamics and either arguing or critiquing why they don't apply this time, or learning the lessons and seeing if we can do something to avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen across history.
Well put. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but in the time we've got left, is there anything? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything you feel we haven't addressed? Is there anything you feel you any impressions you'd like to leave our listeners with before you let them go?
No. I think we covered a lot. I think I would only just hope that the readers, hopefully the listeners who will read the book, will be patient with it, because I draw a long bow before I shoot. So I think 5 out of the 8 chapters are just historical analysis. And then in the last couple of chapters, I bring it back to digital currencies. So even though digital currencies is in the title of the book, and it's the ultimate purpose of the book is to inform the digital currency debate, there is a lot of background analysis that takes place, and I just hope that readers would be generous and patient with it.
Well, I do think the historical background is often important for setting the scene, and if anything, for context. That's what's all too often lacking in a great deal of analyses, be it historical or economic or even legal. But Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a really good conversation. Thank you, AJ.
Anyway, let's do it again sometime.
Sure.
And to our listeners, thank you again. Until next time.